I got all of the 2x6s planed on one side, and I am actually going to need to run them through the table saw to cut them down to width, because after running them through the jointer to plane one side, they're all different widths. In other words, for instance, I would plane this side, and I had to take off a different amount of wood on this board, let's say, as compared to this board, and maybe this board is different. So each of these is some might be this wide, this one might be a little bit narrower, this one might be a different width altogether. So I'm going to need all these to be the same width. But one of the problems I was having is, even with the arrangement where I had the multiple roller stands, the adjustment kept getting off. It kept changing. And I think one of the problems is just the stand, this miter saw stand that I'm using. While it seemed like a good idea at first, I think the miter saw stand is just slightly changing. Plus these boards, the 10-foot boards, are just really heavy. And it was putting a lot of weight on these. So what I did is I ordered a couple universal tool stands, and I'm going to put those together and see if I can get a more fixed height on the jointer with those tool stands that don't have foldable legs on them. Alright, so that's what I'm going to do next. I put the jointer on the table and marked with pencil where I need to drill the holes. Here's a mark. It's a little hard to see there in pencil. And I happened to find some M6 bolts that I had. These are 50 millimeters long, and some M6 nuts. And I'm just using 1/4-inch washers. And I'm using a drill bit a little bit oversized, and I'm going to drill these holes oversized, so there's a little bit of give in them. A little bit of adjustment is possible. They won't go through the holes because of these washers that'll be on there. And I'm going to get this jointer mounted on the stand. Alright, it took me several days to get all of these 2x4s and 2x6s planed on one side, and now it's time to cut them to a width that will be the same for each. So what I did is I moved my workbench out a little bit so that I can get the full 10-foot wide boards from back there all the way to my garage door is just about 20 feet, which is enough to accommodate these 10-foot boards. I've got the saw blade right here in the middle of that. And what we've got here is one side, this side in particular, has been planed to be as straight as I can get it. So if you look down along this edge, it will be perfectly straight, or at least about as straight as I can get it. Now the other side, right here, this side is left untouched, so it could have waves to it, it could have bows in it, in or out, cups, bows, you name it. So what we've got is, because we've got one straight edge, this straight edge now can ride up against the fence, and by moving the fence out closer to the blade we can get a we can cut off a portion of the board and leaving the width that we want. So I've adjusted the blade to be just over the thickness of the board, and the next step is going to be to figure out how wide to make these boards and go ahead and cut them all down to a common width, and then do the same thing for the 2x6s. Of course they would be a little bit wider, but cut them down also. I almost forgot one thing, an update on the jointer with the fixed stand. It worked out better. Yeah, I still had to adjust the rollers several times, and of course the boards were lighter because I was jointing 2x4s instead of 2x6s there at the end after I put the fixed stand in, but I think it did help. So I'm gonna continue with the with this Hercules miter saw stand just for the miter saw. I put the miter saw back on that stand. I've got it folded up right now so I can move it around, and the jointer I'm going to leave on this fixed stand here, and I think it worked out pretty good. Some of the problem that I had is I think the end tables on this jointer also move a bit. There's some flex to those, so you know, this is probably not the best jointer for long heavy boards, but I managed to get it done with you know, quite a bit of adjustment, and it did seem to you know, get at least one edge of the board straight. Alright, so now I'm going to move on, like I mentioned, to the ripping the one side of the 2x4s and then 2x6s to get them to a consistent width, and I'll just do a time-lapse video of that. I finished ripping all of the lumber for the platform down to a consistent width. The 2x4s are now 3 inches wide, and the 2x6s are now 5 inches wide. And some of these were, most of these had a good amount of cutoff. These are all the cutoffs over here. There was one of them that just barely made it. I think this might have been a 2x4, and let me pull this out, and you can see that the amount that was left over was very thin here in the middle. So that one was one of, I think, one of the 2x4s that I had to do quite a lot of planing to get the thickness down, and there wasn't much left of it past the 3 inches. So 3 or 3.5, I think it's 3.5 inches, yeah. So there wasn't much left past 3.5 inches except this tiny sliver here in the middle. And speaking of the cutoffs, one of the things I was on the lookout for while I was doing the cutouts were good pieces that have no knots. So like this one, and these will bend very nice, and I can use these to draw the lofting lines anytime I need a nice even bend in the boat. As I'm drawing the lines to be cutting later, I can use these. I got 2 of them that are 8 feet long, and I got one good one here at 10 feet long. So I got 3 good cutoffs that have no knots in them and bend evenly. All of these cutoffs down here have knots. Some of them even, you know, completely broke while just cutting it out. So they're I mean, those pieces are good, and I'll find a use for some of this scrap wood for something, I'm sure. But yeah, I got 3 good pieces for drawing the lofting lines. And in the time lapse, you saw me add this extra fence modification. So this is something that I built for the table saw, and it's just some 3/4 inch cabinet grade plywood, and it's, you know, perfectly straight. And I built this to just barely fit over the existing fence on the table saw. And the table saw actually has these parts right here that stick out a bit there, and there's one right here that sticks out a bit. So as I was cutting this back piece, I made a notch here and a notch here to fit over those little bumps here, and that worked out really well, because when I put this on, and it just fits over this so nice, those notches line up. And what that means is that the wooden fence extension will not go sliding along as I'm sliding the wood along. So, all right, so the next step is going to be to cut some notches in these and start laying these out in a grid pattern and putting together the platform that I'm going to build the boat on. All right, that's enough for this video. Bye.